Hi, I'm Gordon from Camera Labs, and this near viewer is the Sigma 56mm 1.4 DCDN, one of 4 bright prime lenses the company makes for mirrorless cameras with cropped APS-C sensors. They've been available in multiple mounts for several years now, but the reason for this video is as of late 2024 they're also now finally available in Canon's RF mount. Yes, at long last, this means owners of the EOS R100 to the R7 now finally have access to a selection of native f1.4 primes. And while the Sigma lenses themselves aren't new, it's still big news for Canon EOS R owners who've so far been neglected on the third-party lens front. And lest we forget, even Canon hasn't bothered to make any primes or bright zooms dedicated to their cropped EOS R bodies to date. Now, before you get too excited though, there's still no native Sigma lenses for full-frame EOS R cameras, a situation that I sincerely hope will be resolved soon. And while you can use these DCDN lenses on a full-frame body, they're only designed for the cropped area of a smaller sensor, so they're not ideal. But at least owners of crop frame EOS R bodies now have access to Sigma's existing range of DCDN lenses designed for APS-C mirrorless cameras, including a pair of f2.8 zooms and 4 f1.4 primes. I've already made multiple in-depth reviews of them on a variety of mounts, but in this video I wanted to try out 2 of the new prime lenses in their latest Canon RF versions to show what you can expect in practice, not just in terms of optical quality, but also their autofocusing performance and how their profiles are implemented on the Canon system. So join me as I take the Sigma 30 and 56 1.4 lenses out for a spin on the EOS R10. Just briefly, here's the 30mm 1.4 DCDN costing around $370 or £320, an equivalent to 48mm on a cropped Canon body, so that's delivering pretty standard coverage. Unlike Canon's RFS zooms, there's a sturdy metal lens mount with a rubber grommet providing sealing. The only control is a generously wide manual focusing ring, and there's a 52mm filter thread at the end. And again, unlike Canon's RFS lenses to date, Sigma includes a lens hood. Thanks for that. Here's how the lens looks mounted on an EOS R10 body. It's fairly long, but still very manageable for day-to-day shooting. And here's the 56 1.4 DCDN costing around $500 or £420, an equivalent to 90mm on a cropped Canon body, so that's delivering a classic length that's ideal for portraits. Again, like the other models in this series, you're getting a metal mount with a rubber grommet for sealing, along with a smooth manual focusing ring and a lens hood in the box. The filter thread here also measures 52mm. And now here's how it looks mounted on an EOS R10 body, physically a little bit shorter than the earlier 30mm and looking satisfyingly stubby here. Now let's check out their focusing on the R10, first with the 30mm f1.4 using a central area. Here you can see the focusing is smooth, decisive and fairly quick. For comparison, here's Canon's 18-45 kit zoom close to 30mm, where its maximum aperture is just f5.6. The focusing itself is a little snappier, but it's clear how much less blurring is possible at the modest maximum aperture. Next for the 56mm again at f1.4 and using a central AF area, where again the focusing performance on the R10 is similar. It's smooth, confident and fairly quick. And now for the Canon zoom at 45mm, where its aperture dims even further to f6.3. Like before, the focusing may be fast, but the depth of field is far less shallow, so already you can see the much greater opportunities for blurring on the Sigma primes. Before moving on though, a quick note on the autofocusing coverage. You're looking at the Canon kit zoom here at around 30mm, but this time using continuous autofocus and with the usable focusing area indicated by the 4 white L-shaped markers towards the corners of the frame. Notice how they go all the way to the top and bottom and almost all the way to the sides. Now for the Sigma 30mm, and now notice how those L-shaped markers have moved inwards, indicating a smaller active autofocusing area. And here it is again with the 56mm, showing how the Sigma lenses aren't able to use quite as much of the frame for focusing as Canon's own lenses. Now it's not going to be a huge issue in practice, as you'd rarely be focusing outside this area anyway, but I did want to show you the difference. Next for video autofocus, starting with the Sigma 30mm at 1.4, again with a single AF area in the middle, and smoothly pulling focus between the bottle and the wall. There's sometimes a minor hesitation before the racking starts, but that's actually the same when using Canon's own lenses too. Let's take a look. I'll put the Sigma on the left at 31.4 and the Canon 18-45 at 35.6 on the right to show they both exhibit this pause. But more importantly, look at the difference in depth of field when they're side by side. Next, for the Sigma 56, again at 1.4, where the potential for shallow depth of field effects becomes even more apparent. This is an area where Canon's native RFS lenses today are pretty disappointing, with their modest maximum apertures. This potential for blurring is particularly useful for portraits, as seen here with the Sigma 30mm, again at 1.4 and using face detection on the R10 to easily track me around the frame. And again, that reduced autofocus coverage isn't an issue here. It's an ideal focal length for making presentations to camera. For comparison, here's the Canon 18-45 at 30mm 5.6, where there's clearly much less blurring in the background. And that'll be reflected on still portraits too. Next, for the Sigma 56 at 1.4, delivering a tighter view with even greater potential for blurring in the background. This is an ideal focal length for portraits, although Canon's own RF 50mm 1.8 is a cheaper alternative that's also worth considering. Next, for a look at the quality of a distance subject, as always bright and clear, here angled so that details run into the corners. I'm starting with the Sigma 30mm wide open at 1.4 and again fitted to the EOS R10 body. Taking a closer look in the middle of the frame reveals a good degree of detail and contrast with few complaints, but as you gradually close the aperture you will enjoy a mild boost in both sharpness and contrast, and I'd say that's arguably peaking at around f4 to 5.6. Let's now return to the 1.4 sample and head into the far corners, where the results remain pretty good. There's a small amount of softening, but given the maximum aperture it's not too bad. As before, gradually closing the aperture brings mild improvements to both sharpness and contrast, again with the lens peaking at around f4 to 5.6. Note that Canon's kit zoom is also respectably sharp, albeit with a much more modest aperture to deal with. Next, for the Sigma 56 on the R10, and again starting with the aperture wide open at f1.4. Taking a closer look in the middle of the frame, again shows a decent degree of detail and correction with nothing much to complain about. Meanwhile, gradually closing the aperture brings mild benefits to the sharpness and contrast, and like the 30mm lens, you'll enjoy slightly crisper results when close to around f4 to 5.6. Returning to the f1.4 sample and heading into the far corner reveals minor softening of fine detail and a little darkening, but this is unlikely to bother you if you're using the lens for portraits or other subjects away from the extremes. Closing the aperture to f2 improves both aspects, and even more so at f2.8, with the overall crispness again peaking at around f4 to 5.6. But as noted earlier, the Canon kit zoom can also deliver sharp results, so the big question is what real benefits will you enjoy from the larger aperture of the Sigmas? Now you've already seen what they can do for portraits and presentations, so it's now time for my bokeh ball test with an ornament at the closest focusing distance. I'll start with the Sigma 30mm at 1.4, where you can achieve nice large bokeh blobs that are well behaved with minimal textures or outlining. As I gradually close the aperture, the impact of the diaphragm system becomes more apparent, with the blobs taking on more of a geometric shape. This is most apparent at f5.6 here, which coincidentally is the maximum aperture of the Canon RF 18-45 when it's set to around 30mm. So let's now switch between them, and you'll notice the Canon blobs are a little more rounded at times, due to this being the maximum aperture, versus the Sigma lens, which is closed by 4 stops at this point. But of course the major difference is comparing their maximum apertures, so let's now switch between the Sigma 30 at 1.4 and the Canon 18-45 at 35.6, where the difference is dramatic. The Sigma can deliver substantial blurring with its f1.4 aperture versus the Canon, which inevitably has way less possible at f5.6. Again, a huge 4-stop difference between them. Next, for the Sigma 56 at 1.4, again at the closest focusing distance, where you'll enjoy even larger bokeh blobs, and here they're nice and clean with no distracting textures or outlining. Closing the aperture to f2 makes them more uniformly rounded while avoiding much influence from the diaphragm system, although by f2.8 onwards they've taken on more of an obvious geometric shape. Still clean looking though. As before, I'm going to stop at f5.6 and now switch to the Canon RF 18-45 at 45mm f6.3. Obviously it's not matching the Sigma in coverage or aperture at this point, but this remains the maximum impact that you're going to get from this kit zoom in terms of bokeh balls. Now let's switch between the Canon and the Sigma, both at their maximum apertures, and the difference is of course absolutely enormous. The potential for a shallow depth of field on the Sigma is hugely improved, mostly by being more than 4 stops brighter than the Canon at its longest end, but it's also benefiting from a slightly longer focal length too. Right, now that I've given you a taste of what's possible with these two lenses in their latest Canon versions, it's time for my final verdict. And I'm going to be showing you more samples that I took with both lenses on the R10, all at the maximum aperture of f1.4. And once again, if you want more detailed reports on any of these lenses, check out some of my earlier videos. I've said it before and I'll say it again, Sigma's series of DCDN lenses have transformed multiple systems, but none more so than Canon's. First, they gave a new lease of life to the late EOS M system, and now they're making the current EOS R bodies much more attractive. Canon remains bizarrely uninterested in making aspirational lenses dedicated to their bodies with APS-C sensors. From EFS to EFM and now RF, they've offered little more than a series of dim zooms. Yes, I know there's been a handful of exceptions in the past, remember I've been doing this for over 30 years, but not enough to get really excited about, and sadly their latest RF bodies are the most neglected to date. As of late 2024, Canon's only released a series of uninspiringly dim zooms in the RFS mount, so far avoiding any brighter options or any prime lenses at all. To be fair, some are impressively small, light and sharp, but there's no wow factor and minimal opportunity for shallow depth of field effects. Sure, you could invest in one of their much nicer full-frame RF lenses, but most of these are unnecessarily large, heavy and expensive for a crop body. Thankfully, Sigma has been granted the chance to release their 6 DCDN lenses in the RF mount, and each one makes the Canon crop bodies more attractive than before. There's the 2 bright zooms with f2.8 apertures and the 4 prime lenses, each opening to f1.4. Now, none of them have got optical stabilization, but they're all very sharp and capable of delivering far more blurring than Canon's RF lenses to date. Of the 6 Sigma lenses, the only one with any competition from Canon is the 56 1.4. As an alternative, you could try Canon's own RF 50mm 1.8, a little bit shorter and a little bit dimmer, but still delivering a similar proposition at around half the price. But if you can afford it though, the Sigma is a nicer lens overall, but Canon's Thrifty 50 remains a good budget option for portraits. You could also argue that Canon's RF 16 2.8 represents some competition for Sigma's 16 1.4 and is certainly cheaper and much smaller, but unlike the 50 versus the 56, there's now a 2-stop difference in aperture, which can't be ignored. And it's those brighter apertures which are the big selling point of the Sigma lenses over Canon's options. Whether it's a zoom or a prime lens, most of the Sigma DCDN lenses will substantially outperform Canon's RFS lenses to date. Their larger apertures not only mean greater opportunities for blurring, but also greater light gathering capabilities, in turn allowing faster shutter speeds or lower ISOs under the same conditions. For me, this makes them no-brainers if you're looking for a lens with a bright aperture to inspire your photography or video work without resorting to unwieldy options designed for bigger cameras. Which brings me to the end of this video. As I mentioned at the start, I've got separate reviews of the Sigma 10-18 and 18-50 2.8 zooms in the Canon mount, as well as all of the other primes and zooms in alternative mounts too, if you'd like to find out more detail. Thanks for watching, and if you'd like to see more reviews from me, please do consider giving this video a like, and my channel a follow is all very much appreciated. And if you're thinking of buying these lenses, I've got links to the best prices in the description. Right, I'll see you next time. Bye bye.